Well, welcome. Officially, I'd like to welcome you, Mr. Bananno. I appreciate you coming here today to speak to your soon-to-be fellow Lawrence Tech alumni. Like many of you in the room, Mr. Bananno's career started here at Lawrence Tech in the early 60s, where he came to get his mechanical engineering degree. Mr. Bananno earned his mechanical engineering degree in 1969, and that's where he started his illustrious career with Chrysler Motor Company. Mr. Bananno started his career at Chrysler Motor Company as a production and quality control engineer and plant manager for the Chrysler operations in Chrysler, Del Mexico in 1979. He served as the plant manager for the Sterling Heights Assembly Plant from 1986 and produced the Chrysler LeBaron, the GTS, and the Dodge Tracer sports sedan, as well as the Plymouth Sundance and Dodge Challenger. After a stint as being the general manager of Chrysler Corporation, the Chrysler Maserati coupe operation in Milan, Italy, he continued on as plant manager for transmission operations all the way through 1991. At the age of 52, he had the delicate decision to decide whether or not he was going to retire from Chrysler Corporation when he was approached by Mr. Lee Iacocca, another very famous person from Chrysler Corporation, to take on an operation and help a company grow. That company was by the name of Fomex Corporation. When Mr. Bananno joined the Fomex organization, the company was doing approximately $4 to $5 billion a year in business, and the stock value was trading at about $6 per share. Instead of taking on a salary with Fomex Corporation, he decided to take a stock option, which I think was a very, very wise move at the time, because a few years later, from 1995 to 1997, the stock went up in value to between $16 and $18 a share. I think it's a very wise thing for a mechanical engineer to do, is to look at their options just beyond taking a paycheck every Friday. After 30 years of serving in the Chrysler organization, Mr. Bananno started a new company and served on the board of directors and chairman of the Grove Worldwide Corporation, a publicly traded company that provided mobile cranes, lift assist devices, and other things that leveraged his mechanical engineering background. In the year 2000, Mr. Bananno became chairman and CEO of his own consulting company called Bananno Enterprises, where he was able to give back to many companies that are looking to grow and diversify themselves. He provided consulting services related to capital investment, interim management, and executive consulting services for industrial operations. He served as a senior manufacturing consultant and a visionary for different vehicles. In 2003 through 2008, Mr. Bananno became active in the Zymox Corporation and has successfully led their turnaround efforts. Today, Mr. Salvatore Bananno, also known as Sam Bananno, is currently serving on the board of directors for American Axles Corporation. And as many of us know, here in the Detroit area, many of our tier 1 automotive companies rely on the expertise of people with a strong pedigree as his to help them turn around their organization and keep us all profitable and focus on our manufacturing background. With that, Mr. Bananno, please speak to us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. David, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Wonderful introduction. And I am really proud to be back at my alma mater here. What I'm going to do today is talk to you about my experience and my career history. And some people in here, based on what I've done, refer to me as an entrepreneur. There's not going to be anything fancy here, any visuals, any graphics. I'm going to just sit here and talk to you about how I morphed into what is to be considered an entrepreneur. There is no single event in my life that has impacted my career more than my attainment of a degree here at Lawrence Technological University. When I was here, it was Lawrence Institute of Technology, but that helped me more than anything in terms of being able to develop my career. When I was born in the heart of the city of Detroit, the motor capital of the world, and I knew that if I wanted to succeed, I had to be good in manufacturing. That was in my mind from the time I was a child. I went to a parochial school for 10 years, and because when you got to high school there, they offered secretarial, typing, shorthand, things of this nature. I just couldn't hack it. I wound up having difficulty getting a C average because I was not interested in that. So I transferred to a vocational high school. And in the vocational high school, chemistry, physics, solid geometry, trig were all requirements for that school. You also had to go to school 11 months a year and get a co-op job, and you did learn a skill. Well, all of a sudden I went from having trouble getting a C average to making the Dean's Honor Roll. I was able to get a scholarship in journalism from Michigan State University and Michigan Press. I did not take that scholarship. Instead, I came here and went to Lawrence Tech, now Lawrence Technological University. When I came here, I had just turned 17 years old, 5 months prior to that. So when I started here, it wasn't that I was exceptionally bright that I started with 17 years old. It was my mother lied when she put me into the first grade on my age because she wanted to get me out of the house. So, and basically that's a true story. So when I got here, the point is I was very immature. I got active in everything in the school. I was student council, I was into the fraternity, I was in the school paper. I did very well in all of those. But unfortunately, I got onto academic probation because I was not studying hard enough or doing the work necessary to get my degree. I questioned whether I had the ability to get a degree in engineering, so I dropped out. I dropped out of school and then went to work full time. At that time, I was fortunate enough when I was 19 years old to be able to get a job as a skilled trade person as a layout inspector. And from the time I was 19 to the time I was 23, this company had 5 plants in the US. I was able to take over as the chief inspector and functional test lab supervisor, and with that background, I was able to start at Chrysler Corporation when I was 23 years old as a methods engineer. Now, when I went to work for Chrysler, I was told that even though you're doing the same work as these engineers, you will never get beyond that level because they have strict rules on you had to have a degree. So I looked at some of the guys around me and I thought, you know, if these guys can get a degree, I think I can get a degree also. Matter of fact, I'm sure of it. So I went back to school at night school. I made up my mind I was not going to be involved in any activities. I was just going to go to school, keep a low key, learn whatever I could learn, get my degree as quickly as possible, don't worry about the grades. Well, as a result, I did fairly well in terms of grades. I made the Dean's Honor Roll, Lamb Biota Tau, fraternity, and the Honor Society. So I did well because I was really, when I was in high school, I had a change of attitude. I was not going to stay in the curriculum that was not challenging. Here I had a change in attitude because I felt that if these guys can get a degree, I sure as hell can get a degree. So I developed some confidence. When I went to work for Chrysler, I did start out as a methods engineer, and I worked as a quality engineer, and then I was transferred to become a project engineer, body electrical. And I had the opportunity to work on 2 of the greatest cars I think that were produced in the Detroit area, the Barracuda and the Challenger. After working on those cars, on the design of those cars, the year that I graduated LTU, I was assigned as a quality engineering supervisor at the Hamtramck assembly plant, and that's the plant that built those cars. So I worked on the design of the vehicle, then I went to the manufacturing plant, worked in the manufacturing plant, eventually became production superintendent, and worked on that same vehicle. Now, that move there from engineering to manufacturing was a 2-year developmental program that the engineering department put me on. Fortunately or unfortunately, that 2-year developmental program lasted 25 years. They never let me out of manufacturing, but I did have the opportunity when I was there to work on 22 different jobs, 22 different assignments. And what I want you to keep in mind as you go through your careers is keep in mind the old adage, do you have 10 years experience or do you have 2 years experience 5 times? And I was fortunate enough to be able to move through various departments, all the way from quality to production control to engineering to manufacturing, from the automotive division to the powertrain division. My jobs at Chrysler, the most any job lasted was 4 years, and I only had 3 jobs that lasted over 3 years. So they were all like 2-year assignments. Now, what you should think about is, are you learning and are you contributing in your assignments? And I'd like to, in these various assignments, I'd like to explain what I learned over the years and how this could apply to you. Now, one thing that you have to keep in your mind, and these are some of the things that you have to deal with in life. If you're going to run an organization, organizations are resistant to change. So in your mind, you have to do a good job of selling your change, selling your programs, and if you're running the organization, if people are resistant, then you've got to move them out, because you have to accomplish certain goals and people can't be fighting you on those goals. You're sometimes going to work for people that are not as competent as you. Think about this. If you are always working for people that are more competent than you, how are you going to move ahead? Okay, so on your road to the top, if you're ever going to make it all the way to the top, you're going to be working for people that aren't quite as competent as you, but that's the step you take as you work your way up. You will probably get fired at some time in your career, and you'll get fired either because of politics, because of competency, or the desire of a group to prevent you from attaining your goals for the organization. When you go in an organization, think about change and do some evolutionary things consistently each and every day, and once in a while do some revolutionary things. That's how you change an organization. The other thing I would tell you is, do not mistake experience for intelligence. You can become awed by somebody that's been in the department for 20 or 25 years because they've done the same thing over and over again, but sometimes they are so locked in what they're doing, they will never change. Now, if you have never had a failure in your career, once you've gotten onto the job market, I would say that you probably haven't set up high enough goals. When I interview somebody and they tell me they've never had a failure during the interview, first thing comes to my mind is their goals weren't high enough. I expect people to set up goals and to fail once in a while. I failed several times in my career. I've been fired several times in my career. And when I interview somebody, I hope that they've learned from a failure. And if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to understand that you do learn from failures. When I go into an organization, I tell that organization that I always, in each and every organization, set up 3 major priorities, my 3 major priorities. And my 3 priorities, and I hope that everybody has those priorities in my organization, is number 1, myself, my personal health, my personal and mental well-being. That's very, very important. That's number 1. Number 2 is my family, and number 3 is my company. So think about this. If you are not healthy, physical, mentally healthy, then instead of being an asset, you're a liability to the company, and you're a liability to your family. So you've got to take care of yourself first. That should always be your number 1 priority. A French economist is believed to have coined the phrase entrepreneur in the 9th century, one who undertakes an enterprise acting as an intermediary between capital and labor. Entrepreneur shifts economic resources out of lower and higher productivity and greater yields. For you to be a successful entrepreneur, you must keep the following things in mind. You cannot be successful unless you are a leader. Now, I keep a simple brass plaque on my desk that refers to the snow sled dog racing team. And I'd like you to think about what it says, and I quote, "If you ain't the lead dog, the scenery never changes." So think about being in position 2, 3, or 4 in what you're looking at, all right? Unless you marry the boss's daughter or son, or are currently independently wealthy, you'll need to use somebody else's money if you want to be a successful entrepreneur. And I think of the one young man that joined a company business. His father-in-law wanted to get him into the business and said, "We want to make you a partner, a 50-50 partner. We'd like you to work in the factory." He said, "I don't like working in the factory." He says, "Well," he says, "maybe we can put you into the office." He said, "I don't really like working in the office either." He says, "That's all we have is a factory and office." He said, "What can we do for you?" He says, "Well, being a true entrepreneur is you can buy me out for 50% of the value of the business." Okay? Now understand that today, right now, you're developing your reputation and impacting the decision other investors will have in making an investment in you in the future. I have a friend that teaches a class, the same class, and the one thing he points out is that you as a college student right now, you have credit ratings based on paying your tuition, based on paying your rent, based on paying your credit cards. You let that go to hell, and then when you want to start in business for yourself, people look back at that. So make sure you keep your credit up as high as you can all the time. Be able to communicate. And I think this has helped me more than anything, is the ability to communicate. I received an award in journalism. I did not go into journalism, but I thought I always had the ability to write and to communicate. You can be a good engineer and make good money, and whether you're engineering or whether you're in a business curriculum, whatever curriculum you're in, you still have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to write a good letter or a good plan or communicate to somebody if you want to sell your plan. That's the key to success. Now, it's not hard to put a good, outstanding business plan together. The biggest failure is the failure to execute. I've seen numerous business plans that all look good, all are going to get to this point in 2 years, but the people don't execute properly. The most important thing is execution. Now, give up routine. If you want to be an entrepreneur, you don't have the luxury to schedule your vacation 12 months from now. You have to be flexible. You have to relocate if the opportunity presents itself. From 1980 to 2000, I personally lived in 3 different countries, 4 states, and at least 8 homes. Never become excess and obsolete. In the automotive industry, every year when they have a model change and the new models come down the line, there are parts that are never used again, they're excess and obsolete. Keep your training going, keep your education going, learn each and every day. I still learn each and every day. So don't become excess and obsolete, and understand that venture capitalists will demand much more from you than an investor, bank, family, or friend. So if you're going to go in as an entrepreneur and set up a business, you're probably going to have to borrow money, and understand that a venture capitalist, they're going to take your arm, your leg, and your first child to loan you the money. If you go to friends or bank, they'll want a percentage back on the monies that they're loaning you. And the other thing is, when I talk about don't be afraid of failure, of the new businesses that are funded by entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs wind up with only a 17.6% success rate. Most new businesses have 11.7% success rate. But what they do is, as venture capitalists, they set up their entire fund assuming an 80% failure rate. And what they hope is that on the 2 out of 10 that really make it, that they get 4 or 5 times their investment that makes up for the failures. So even though you've got an outstanding business plan, and these guys are very good, even though you have an outstanding business plan, they assume that they're going to get an 80% failure rate. Don't let that discourage you. And some of them will never invest in somebody unless they've tried it and have had some experience with it not going right, because you learn from that. Wannabe entrepreneurs are looking for a great idea to sink their teeth into, a multi-million-dollar opportunity, something that is revolutionary and might change the world. Unfortunately, new things often won't be recognized as important. Yahoo didn't think that Google was interesting enough to invest in and declined to buy them. Twitter now has 300 million users, but most people disregarded it as a fluke when they first learned about it, including some very high-profile investors. When a startup entrepreneur says he has a new idea and there is no competition, it can usually only mean 2 things. The idea sucks, or he simply didn't do his homework. So when you're looking for something to do, look at what you can improve. See what worked before and how you can apply a new medium or combine it with something else that worked. There were 170 YouTube companies before YouTube, and they all failed until YouTube came along at the right time, then executed well, and took some chances, and voila, success. Want to build a $100 million company? Start with something simple, improve an old idea, or combine a few successful ideas into a new one. Now, I want to talk to you about the economic importance of small businesses. Small businesses and the entrepreneurs are the backbone of the U.S. economy. I didn't realize this myself, the actual facts and the details of it, but according to the Small Business Administration, small business represents 99.7% of all employer firms, enjoying half of the private sector employees, and are responsible for more than 45% of the total private payroll. Moreover, they generate between 60% and 80% of new jobs annually. And in terms of innovation, they also pack the most in that they have 13 times more patents per employee than large businesses. Now, in the Wall Street Journal just 5 days ago, these are facts from 5 days ago, startups are now being launched with an average of 4 to 9 employees, down from 7.5 employees in the 90s. In 2009, new independent businesses created a total of 2.3 million jobs, which is 700,000 fewer than the annual rate of 2008. What does that mean? Well, that means that last year, entrepreneurs are finding a way to do more with less. They're using outside services. They're using the internet. They're connected to them for payrolls, for inventory management. So part of the problem with this current recession is that the job creation from small businesses and entrepreneurs, there's just as much job creation, but they're not hiring as many people. They're doing it with less people. They're becoming more efficient. Just-in-time material supply, if you think about that, you don't need as many people in the warehouse. You don't need as many people controlling your inventory. So I believe the path to becoming an entrepreneur is one that you control. Find your niche, your passion, whatever you call it today, and become self-disciplined to drive it. Continue your education, go to seminars, continue to read, but do not be risk adverse. You must assume the risk, Take responsibility for those risks, and don't be afraid of challenges. Most of my jobs were jobs that nobody wanted. And that's where your greatest opportunity is if you've got a job that people find very tough and don't want, that's your opportunity to excel. At Chrysler, I was always assigned to a program that was in deep trouble. I built a truck plant in Mexico and Maseratis in Italy, and very few people at the time took on international assignments. The one thing I remembered is when you were in another country, respect the tradition and culture of that country. When I was in Mexico, and these are some of the small things I have done, I was asked to highlight some of the small things that I have done in terms of becoming an entrepreneur. When I was in Mexico, I set a goal that within 90 days, all of the meetings that I attended would have to be in Spanish. So I had to learn the language fluently within that 90-day period. In Italy, we had a disastrous project going in Italy. And when I was asked by ICOCA to go into Italy, there were 17 expats there and 9 interpreters. So I was able to do a search on the company and find out people that spoke the language, and I replaced 11 of the 17 and eliminated all the interpreters. We communicated well with the Italians, and we were very successful because we spoke the language of the country that we lived in. At Fomex, as was mentioned earlier, we had to go to the banks when I started at Fomex. I started at Fomex 2 days after I retired from Chrysler. I retired from Chrysler on a Friday, started with Fomex on a Monday, and they were on the verge of bankruptcy. So we had to go out and raise something like $500 million. When we went to the people on Wall Street, I indicated, this is a plan that I think will work. We're going to cut from 55 operations, 55 factories, down to 35. And I'm willing to bet my paycheck on it, so I took 6 months of my pay in stock at $6 a share, and 2 years later, it was close to $18 a share. So I took a chance. At Grove Worldwide, I took my money and invested in Grove Worldwide. I was a small investor compared to Robert Bass, who is the individual that bought Grove Worldwide. We did about $1.4 billion a year in business. But part of what I had learned, cycle time reduction, organizational development, these were the things that stymied the organization and too much overhead. We were able to turn those things around and make some money. Part of Bananno Enterprises, I invested along with other people in about 10 service and manufacturing industries. Right now I'm invested in about 9 of those companies. When I invested in one company that somebody convinced me was a good investment, 6 months later they defaulted on the bank covenants, which meant they were going to go bankrupt. So I had to sit down with the bank. They asked me to step in for 6 months to run the company until we get a president to step in. Well, I was there for 3 years rather than 6 months. But the one thing I did is I sat down with every department manager and spent about 5 hours with that department manager. And I asked them, what is wrong with this company and what has to be fixed? And it's amazing, they all knew what was wrong with the company and what things had to change, but the prior management didn't have the guts to execute the plan. So they identified, sitting down with them in the first 3 weeks, about a 17% overhead reduction and a $1.7 million reduction in cost. So I then said, okay, we got 30 days to implement it. No, these things take months. I said, no, it doesn't take months. You're in trouble, you implement them in 30 days, and we can always add back later on. But you take decisive action when a company is in trouble. So what I would say to you is if I looked at one of the things that I didn't do right, as you go along, you learn. And you must learn to work with the board of directors. And with Grove, there was a company that I had talked to you about earlier. I felt that we had to change 2 of the key executives in the company. The board was concerned that if we did that, it might upset Wall Street. We went back and forth on it, and I left the company. And 9 months later, Robert Bass lost close to $50 million of investment because he hadn't made the changes. So I failed in convincing the board that it was a thing that had to be done. I didn't get hurt, but I still didn't do my job. So the one thing is building confidence. And it's kind of funny because when I was in the cab on the way here today, you know, you read in the back of the cab, they have sayings, you know, to occupy your time as you're going to the airport or whatever. And there was one saying, a couple of sayings that I thought that were very, very good. And one is, conceit is bragging about yourself. Confidence means you believe you can get the job done. So there's a difference between conceit and confidence. And that was Johnny Unitas that said that. Form networks by surrounding yourself with people who have an entrepreneurial mindset. Look around you. These are the people that you're going to be dealing with years from now. There's no question networking helps. I got a call from Iacocca to run a company, and I hadn't talked to him for a year, and he had left Chrysler Corporation at the time. It was the networking. It was the networking, I'm sure, that got me on the board of American Axle. So keep your contacts, always keep your contacts in place. Your attitude must be tempered by humility in order to take on new adventures. Set your egos aside and try and learn from everybody. Set goals. Absolutely set goals for yourself. Don't be afraid. If you attain every one of your goals, then you haven't set hefty enough goals, all right? And a lot of people, as I said, can put a good business plan together. It's hard to execute a business plan. So you need both, the execution and the business plan. And again, in the taxi today on the way up there was a saying that said, after all is said and done, more is said than done. And that was Aesop, all right? Stay hungry. How do you stay ahead of the curve? Never stop growing. Strive for continuous improvement. Every day, look at, have I done something better today than I did yesterday? And as I said earlier, when you go into an organization, you expect some revolutionary changes, but you also expect evolutionary changes. So when you look at productivity improvements, you go like this, spike up, go like this, spike up. So that's what you need to look for. After I had written my speech and basically thought I had completed it, there was an article in the USA Today, and it was written by Rhonda Abrams. And I'd like to share it with you because it expresses a lot of the things that I have felt and a lot of things that I try to get over to you. But this is Rhonda Abrams. Someone who needs an extremely high level of security might be challenged by the entrepreneurial lifestyle. Yet a lot of people who don't think of themselves as embracing risk become entrepreneurs. The key is that although the successful entrepreneur takes risks, those risks are measured. Though entrepreneurs frequently go out on limbs, the one thing that makes it generally palatable is they test that limb first to make sure it has a good chance of bearing their weight. They measure the risk. Entrepreneurship can be applied to virtually any field or profession. You don't have to start a business. You can be part of an organization. You have to find better ways of improving the process, better ways of serving the customer, and if you're a true entrepreneur, you probably have the following key characteristics. You're driven to succeed, you want to succeed, you become so motivated to achieve your goals that you're prepared to overcome obstacles that would discourage others. You're a self-starter and go-getter. You routinely see opportunities while other people see roadblocks. You take control of your own destiny and bear responsibility for your own actions. The buck truly stops with you. You are willing to give up the security blanket of a large corporation. You don't mind working without a safety net or a regular paycheck or the benefits and social structure that an established employer provides. The one thing I saw when I was reading about entrepreneurs is that Friday payday is the day that almost everybody is happy except for a starting young entrepreneur that has to make the payroll. So, okay. You thrive on change. In the entrepreneurial world, change is a given. You welcome it, and it is exciting. The other thing is you understand the importance of making a profit, because I don't care how much money you've been given, I don't care how good your idea is, if it doesn't make a profit, it just doesn't work. Think about $500 million that we just gave this one company, Sonar, the company in California that does the solar tubes. $500 million the government gave it to them last year. They're bankrupt this year. Does failure mean you failed? One of the key, and this is again a quoting from her, one of the key defining factors for successful entrepreneurs is the ability, or rather determination, to not view failure as failure. Rather than keeping setbacks personal or becoming discouraged by them, successful entrepreneurs seize them as an opportunity to learn. If you've had a failure, if you've been fired, if you've lost your job, what did you learn from that experience? You may have lost your job unjustly, or you may have lost your job because you didn't perform properly, or you weren't well enough educated. Learn from those experiences. So in summary, I have been very, very fortunate. You know, I didn't mention this earlier in my presentation. I have been as fortunate as anybody standing in this room, because from the time I was 18 years old, when I turned 19, I was laid off for 2 weeks. And in my entire life, I've never been out of work other than those 2 weeks. And the people in this room will never, hopefully you will, but with today's economy, it's going to be very, very difficult to be able to say that in 50 years from now, that you've been able to work continuously without ever being without a job or without ever being laid off. One of the things that I like to do is I have sayings, and you can think about this and ask me about it later on, but what I call Bananno's theorem is when you're working in a company, your opportunity for success in a large company is directly proportional to the distance from world headquarters and inversely proportional to the help that you get from them. So think about that, all right? Now, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, your life really doesn't change much whether if you're working in a particular industry and you're working in Detroit, or you're working in St. Louis, or you're working in California, or you're working in Europe. You go to work every day, you perform a task, your whole life is 8 to 10 hours of work or 12 hours of work. You come home and your day is over and you expect your significant other to be there. When you move around the world, your significant other and your family have the hardest time because their life is completely changed, whereas yours hasn't changed that much. You still have a job, you're still working, you're still doing the things you were doing, whether it's in a different location or not. Know the value of a good business plan. Understand what EBITDA is, EBITDA, because that's going to determine the value of your business. Don't become discouraged from setbacks. Know your sources of revenue. And when I say revenue, I'm referring to it in 2 ways. If you start a business, where's the money coming from? To start that business, is it going to be a bank? Is it going to be your friends? Is it going to be a venture capitalist? But you've got to put a good business plan together and understand the value of the business. The one thing about it is completing your degree requirements here at LTU prove that you can solve problems and prove that you guys and ladies are bright, intelligent individuals. From here on, it's a matter of motivation, determining what you want to do. And what I would do is open it up to questions and answers. I've talked a lot about myself. I tried to share some of my experiences with you. But I'm sure there are other things that are on your mind that you might want to ask some questions on. If somebody asked me what I would do differently, what I would have done differently in my career is I would have studied venture capitalism, spent more time on the business end of it, and spent more time in New York and getting familiar with Wall Street. That's where the money is. That's where they generate the money, and you have to know what's going on there. And you have young people that I dealt with in Wall Street, 21, 22 years old, working 22, 23 hours a day on deals, but by the time they're 24 and 25 years old, they're making $1 million. So.
Mr. Bananno, I have a question for you.
Yes.
You know, you've gone through quite a few transitions in your career. You started off with what I would call a very safe employer, Chrysler Corporation, late 60s, early 70s, and things of that nature. You decided to leave them and start taking chances with your career. What was your exit strategy or your exit philosophy with each venture that you take on, especially now that you're involved with reviewing a lot of business plans and making a decision whether or not you're going to invest your own money in an opportunity?
Well, one thing that I look at is when I look at an opportunity, I'm not a person that wants to go into someplace for 5 years. That's just not into me, 5 or 10 years. I want to go into an operation, an organization, and the first 3 to 6 months, you study that organization, you look at the external environment, the internal, what is affecting the business, the organization, the customers. You really have to understand, and it takes 3 to 6 months to do that. The next 6 months, I'm putting together my business plan for the changes that are required. The following 6 months, I'm looking at setting up not only my goals and objectives, but my monitor for making sure that the business is continually successful. And in the next 6 months, I'm looking for my next assignment. I like to build organizations. I like to fix organizations. I don't like to be there for another 4 years when it's running smoothly, because that's not a challenge to me. Everybody has different challenges. There are people that would be happy with being in an organization, for 25 years and doing the same thing. At Chrysler, I spent close to 30 years at Chrysler, but I had 22 different jobs. And as I said, I took lateral moves. I took moves to the second shift. I took moves out of the country. I went from production to production control to quality engineering to the powertrain operations to the assembly plants. So always look for another opportunity, and you learn. If you're a good manager and executive, you can move almost into anything. When I left Chrysler, I went into polyurethane foam, Foamex. When I went from foam, then I went into industrial cranes. From industrial cranes, I went into membrane switches, small membrane switches. So look for the challenge, because it makes life much more interesting. Anybody here have any questions? Yes?
In your opinion, what are the major economic, political, cultural, environmental, regulatory problems facing small business in the U.S. today?
Everybody will tell you that they think it's uncertainty. They don't know what's going to go on in terms of taxes. They don't know what the healthcare requirements are going to be for their employees. So I have people with the company that I was involved with, I'm no longer involved with it. The president of the company didn't want to make investments because he didn't know what was going to happen. I think he should have made the investments because business was picking up and people were working overtime. But I think the biggest thing everybody says is uncertainty. I think the other thing is a transfer of resources, because we've had people in the Detroit area working in automotive assembly plants that have been making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $100,000 a year working on the assembly lines. Those jobs are gone. The wages have been reduced, and now we have all of these people that are used to making that kind of money that can't make that kind of money. So you have to retrain the people. And to be honest with you, looking at a lot of the people that are just out of high school, a lot of people just out of high school compared to years ago are not as well trained as they were years ago. And I think even this administration and other administrations have never given enough support for industrial vocational schools. Everybody thinks they have to have a college degree or they're a failure. When I was a young man, I wanted to become a tool and die maker, and that was it. And my dream was to be able to make $10,000 a year, go to some faraway island and surf and live with some young lady on the beach, all right? But yeah, we have to put more into training people, and they don't have to all be engineers and have master's program and business degrees. There are jobs out there that require skills. And America, unless we concentrate on manufacturing and get some more focus on manufacturing, our status in the world is going to change. Yes?
You mentioned kind of dealing with Wall Street, and I wanted to ask, what does that kind of pertain to? Like the ins and outs? Were you working with like investment firms? Like maybe you could just elaborate on that a little bit.
My experience on Wall Street started with Fomex, right? When you're in a large company, you never have responsibility for the entire company unless you're the top guy. So when I went to Fomex, immediately when I got to Fomex, I found out we had to raise $450 to $500 million. How do you do that? You go to Chase, you go to UBS, you go to all the banking institutions, and you make a presentation to them and get them to buy bonds, your bonds, or loan you money, and you learn how they operate. So I had never done this before, but when I went there, we hit all the offices in New York, and then they have branches in 5 other states. Charter plane flew you there, limo pick you up, take the 5 people, you make a presentation for 2 hours, get back on the plane, fly somewhere else, make the presentation, and on and on. And there are people that do that constantly. So I learned how that end of the business worked. And when I retired 3 times, right? But when I retired, I had to make a decision. Did I want to stay in the New York area, or do I want to stay somewhere else in Chicago? And I wanted to invest in small companies. Right now I'm on the board and investor in Waukesha Tool, Climax Tool Company, and about 7 other companies. If I would have stayed in New York, they told me that they only do $500 million deals. If you want to get into the smaller market, then you go into the Chicago area, the Detroit area, the Midwest, and invest in smaller companies in the Midwest. So when I tell you I'm invested in these companies, usually what you wind up with is about 30 investors. And 30 investors can pledge up to, an example, $300,000 over a 7-year period. So if an investment comes up, they say you have to put 40 or 50,000 in, you do that. That's one way it's done. There's another group that I invest with that they're so successful that they say, here's an investment. How much do you want to invest? And we'll tell you how much you can invest. And that group there, I just got a small check yesterday from that group, but that group has already returned 2.5 times my investment, and it's only over a 4-year period. That one was actually a company that did packaging company out of Wisconsin. And by the way, those investors focus on Wisconsin, Illinois area. They focus on being close to the companies they invest in, and they'll do investments that's all they have to do is raise $10 to $20 million. to buy the company. So they're looking at smaller companies. And the one thing is, you learn that to make an investment in a company, you got to put up a little bit of your own money, but if it's your idea, if you're the president of the company, you probably wind up with less than 5% of the investment in the company. The other investment comes from outside investors and from the banks or venture capitalists. The other thing is when you go into these companies, you do a business model. And the business model says if we invest this much money, and here's what our investment is, and if their business plan says that they're going to grow so much a year, at the end of 5 years, you should have valued the business such that you get out of your investment and you set it up so it can be sold to somebody else or management can buy the company and own the company on their own. You always try and set it up to get your investment out in 5 to 7 years for private investors.
How many of the companies that you work with or invested in have
Propri-
proprietary technologies or processes?
I would say that there are some patents at Waukesha Tool, and when they bought the company, they bought it with the patents. Zymox had some patents and they have some proprietary processing technologies. They got out of the patent business because they found that when you filed for a patent, people would study your patent and find a way of getting around it, so they try and keep everything proprietary. But the companies that I'm dealing with, there's not a lot of them. Now, American Axle, I can't tell you how many patents they have. They have a lot of patents, and they have a whole crew and a legal department that concentrates on patents.
So is that an area that you look at when you look at investing in companies, about how they either are protecting that or how they're moving forward without revealing what they're doing?
Oh, I think the answer is yes to both of those, but the big thing I look at is, do they make a profit? And can they continue to make a profit? And when I mentioned EBITDA, if you guys study that, I assume you have or haven't. When you look at a company, when you look at all the costs in the company, come down, and the bottom line that an investor will look at is EBITDA. That's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. It's basically the cash flow. So if you have a company that has $10 million in EBITDA, and it's a manufacturing company, the guys on Wall Street or venture capitalists or private investors, if it's a manufacturing and old company, will generally say it's worth 4 times EBITDA, 4 times the earnings. It can be worth 3 times, 7 or 8 times, depending on whether there's a growth from 7 million to 10 million, you expect 15 million. So very, very important term for you to understand is EBITDA. EBITDA, but it's E-B-I-T-D-A. That determines the value of your business. And when they look at it, you can have a company that's very successful, that's making $10 million a year, and somebody will come in and do a leveraged buyout. Leveraged buyouts are the things you have to be careful of because they borrow so much money that $10 million a year doesn't pay for the interest and your investments in your equipment and everything. So that's your starting point, is your EBITDA. Yes?
A lot of the companies you talked about today involve turnaround or changing the company. In your experience, is there one particular method for conveying change to the company that's worked for you?
You're absolutely correct. That's all I've been involved with is turnarounds, all right? Because generally, the plum jobs of a company that's operating and making a lot of money, they'll promote from within, all right? It's generally, if they're going to move you in from the outside, it's because they're not happy with the organization. So when I go into a company, again, the first thing I do is I sit down with all the managers in the company, the organization, and I ask them what has to be done. And if they've been in the company 3 to 5 years, they understand what has to be done. Then I talk to the customer base. I talk to all the key customers and how have we been servicing you? Are you getting your parts on time? You have good quality, etc. Then I sit down with the CFO, company financial officer, and I look at all the costs in the company. And I use process mapping. I look at what things can be done to speed up the time from inception to delivery, what can be done concurrently, and what are the obstacles in the organization that prevent a very quick decision on things that have to be done. And you will find that many organizations know it has to be done, but because of the politics in the organization, they don't do it, or they have somebody fight it, or they do it 6 months after they've done it. I always look at zero-based manning. When I go into a company too, I look at zero-based manning. That's a term I've coined. And what I do is I go up to the board in a meeting with the organization. I said, all right, tell me what your objectives are for the next 3 years. If they want to tell you 5, 10 years, I don't want to hear that because it's pretty hard to predict even 2 years out. So we look at what are the objectives for the next 3 years. What do we want to accomplish? What should our sales revenue be? What should our profit be? And currently, what tools do you have in place to get that done? And when I talk about tools in place, I mean your entire organization. So if they tell me that they have 2 engineers, 5 salespeople, 4 manufacturing people, I say, to get this done, what do you need? Forget about what you have. What do you need? So they list what they need, and then you go back here and said, well, you have 2 engineering people, you say you need 3, so maybe that's correct. You have 5 salespeople, you say you need 2 or 4. So you look at your resources, and then you determine from your resources, do you have people you don't need that you need to get out of the organization or retrain so you can put them into another job? Do you have the money that you need to get the job done? And basically, you look at what do you need to get the job done? And because working at Chrysler and working at companies that are, on the verge of bankruptcy, you'd be amazed what you can get done with far fewer people. And you usually find out that people like to multitask. They don't want to be locked up in one little cubbyhole doing one thing. You give them more responsibility, and you'd be surprised how effective and efficient they are. So I look at that. I look at zero-based manning. I look at process mapping of the entire product and trying to eliminate as much waste as you can. When I
just think we're at a point now where we really have to stop. I mean,
Okay.
everybody is so excited. We want to listen. You brought an unbelievable message of the entrepreneurial journey. Thank you.
Thank you.